There are several different types of PHP files you will find in WordPress, and in this lesson we're going to talk about a few of them. Now, the first type of files you're going to find are core WordPress files, and we'll break these down a little bit further, but those are generally not edited, not something you really need to change, but you might want to go explore to see how WordPress works under the hood. Next up, we're going to have our theme files. Now, if we're editing a theme or if we're building a theme from scratch, we definitely want to know about these, but there are also possibly other themes that are installed on your site but not activated, and you may need to look through those as well. But there's theme files, and those are often edited. And then we have plugin files. So you install a lot of plugins on your site. Those files have to live somewhere. Most plugin files you are not going to edit, but we will look much later in this course at how to build your own plugins, in which case you will be editing them, and you might want to go look at other plugin files and see how they're doing things. So we've got to look at those as well. And then there's this fourth type that isn't really a separate one, so to say, but there are a lot of included files. So small snippets that are pulled in elsewhere, and this exists within WordPress core, it exists within theme and plugin files. So it's not really its own category. It's just sometimes when you open up a file, you won't find necessarily all the code you expected. Sometimes it'll be pulling in some code from other files. So what we're going to do, and I encourage you to follow along after I kind of take you through this process and go more in depth into yourself, but grab all of the files for your WordPress install. So if you're using local here, you're just going to grab your public folder, and I'm going to open that up in my editor. Now, the reason I'm doing this is I just want to start walking you through some of the many files that we have available. Now, notice we could start off in our index file, and that's saying, hey, go ahead and require WP blog header. And we could come down into blog header and see that that's requiring WP load and template loader and checking to see that it did the header here. Now, all of this code is not going to make sense to you, and I don't really expect you to start trailing through and finding all of these different files, but this is just an example of how you could begin that process. Now, a lot of these files here are very high-level files that aren't necessarily doing a whole bunch there, but they are checking some things. Again, this is handling login. This one's going to be doing a bit more. You could see some of these other ones. Anytime you see require, that's going to be pulling in files. And you don't need to go through all these or understand them, but these are core WordPress files. Now, the other place we're going to find core WordPress files is inside WP admin. Now, these are all the files that are used to build the admin area of WordPress. So if you're ever editing a post or a page, you can see what is going on there. Now, this stuff may not make sense at first, but I guarantee as you learn more and more about WordPress, you'll find that going in and looking up some stuff in here can be helpful. So going down even further, you can see there's subfolders here with other stuff going on, all the JavaScript, included files, all of the different classes we have in WordPress. We haven't really got too much into that, controlling menus, plugins, all that. So there's a lot here that is just used to build WordPress core. And the third folder here, WordPress core being WordPress itself, includes so a bunch of libraries that are available, things like that. Again, some classes set up, all of that stuff here. You're not going to be editing or playing around with these things too much. But I do want to point out one of the qualities of these types of themes is that they're generally going to open a PHP block and be all PHP. So even if you open one that has a little HTML that you could find, maybe for example, it's echoing out like a H1 tag or an H2 tag or something like that, that happens from time to time. But most of these, you can see here, we've got a little bit of HTML mixed in. But most of these core WordPress files are just going to be a lot of straight PHP. And so that's one subset of files that you're going to have, ones that are just mostly PHP. Now, if we come into WP content and into themes, this is where all of our themes lived. And I'm just going to open up a basic default WordPress theme and show you one of their PHP files. Notice we open up PHP. We've got some PHP going on, but there's also more HTML here. We've got some includes and then some more HTML down here. If we were to open up other files, we would find the same. a mix. We've got some HTML, we've got some PHP. Most of our theme files are actually HTML files that have PHP inside of them, as opposed to some of the core files and many of the core files, which are straight up PHP with a little bit of HTML mixed in. Now, this difference may not make a lot of sense to you at this point, but I do want to point out that difference there. You're going to see inside of the theme stuff a little bit more HTML going on. Then inside of WP content, we also have our plugin files. So if you're building a custom plugin, this is where it's going to go. And again, most of these files, again, are going to be mostly PHP. Some of them may have some templates and a little bit of HTML mixed in. It really depends on what the plugin is, but a lot of them are just programmatically customizing things. So I'm just scrolling and scrolling. Notice that we have some PHP or some HTML mixed in, but most of it is straight PHP. So that's a quick overview of some core files, some theme files, some plugin files that are inside WP content. And I'll mention in closing, there's also this WP config, which is set up with the usernames and passwords. So if you ever need to migrate your site, or if you're setting up something custom there, or if you ever need to go find that, you could find that there. You'll also see a WP config sample, and this is a file that you should actually delete, especially before you push the site live. Not needed, should definitely be deleted. And there we have it. This is a good walkthrough, although I would suggest that you take the time to go into this in a bit more depth, simply by perusing around, seeing what makes sense to you. Again, the more you learn, the more this is going to make sense. So don't feel bad if you don't really understand, you click through and don't understand what anything means, but try looking for a few key names, things you might recognize, or you could just go, oh, this code lives here. I know what the customizer is. Here's a bunch of customizer code. Cool. Even if it's just that at this point, that's great. So just a quick review here before we close out. We've got our core WordPress files, primarily PHP, not going to be editing these. They live in that root directory, they live in WP admin, and they live in WP includes. Then we've got our theme files. We are going to be editing these. We are going to be playing around, and they tend to be the reverse. They tend to be a lot of basically an HTML page with some PHP blocks and code inside of it, which is valid. Some themes that are more complex, you may see more PHP, but in general, that's what we've got going on. Then we've got our plugin files. Other people's plugins, you're probably not going to be editing, but if they are your own plugins, then you do want to edit them. And they're a little bit more like the core WordPress files, that they're going to be mostly PHP happening with a little bit of HTML thrown in there. So from here, what I'd like you to do is, again, take a look through all the different PHP files in WordPress. You don't have to understand it all, just explore and see what makes sense, see how far you can get. Once you do that, then come on back, and from this point on in our PHP for WordPress, we're going to shift from kind of generic PHP stuff and start looking at some very specific WordPress things that PHP can do inside of WordPress, but they don't really do by default outside of WordPress. So they're specific things, and we're going to start off with the loop as an example of that.